The crisp autumn air filled the quiet park, the golden leaves crunching softly beneath Sarah's boots. She paused on a bench, a paperback open in her hands, her mind lost in the story. It was a rare moment of peace amidst her busy days as a private tutor. Suddenly, a soft rustling caught her attention. A boy, no older than 13, struggled with the leash of a frightened dog. His small hands trembled as the dog barked loudly, pulling him further away from safety. Sarah's heart surged. Without thinking, she stood and walked toward them. "Hey, it's okay," she said softly, her voice gentle yet firm. Slowly, she knelt down beside the boy, her calm presence soothing the frantic dog. "Just stay still. Let's take a few deep breaths." The boy's eyes met hers, wide with surprise and gratitude. "Thank you," he whispered. "I didn't know what to do." Sarah smiled. "You're doing fine. Dogs can sense when we're scared. Just breathe." For a moment, time seemed to pause. The boy looked up at her, his face open and trusting. "I'm Barron," he said quietly. Sarah's brow furrowed slightly. Barron. The name sounded familiar, but her mind couldn't place it. "Nice to meet you, Barron," she said, brushing her hands over the dog's fur to calm it further. Before she could process much more, a man in a dark suit approached. His expression was cold, his earpiece crackling softly. "Ma'am," he said in a stern voice, "you need to come with us. Now." Sarah's heart thumped wildly in her chest. "What's going on?" she asked, standing quickly. "I just helped him." The agent didn't offer an explanation. "It's better this way." "Please come with us," he repeated, more firmly this time. Reluctantly, Sarah followed. Her mind raced, a million questions swirling in her head. Who was this boy? Why did they need to intervene so abruptly? And why had helping someone turned into a threat? As they walked away, her eyes locked briefly on Barron's, who offered her a small, almost imperceptible smile. She swallowed hard, confusion overtaking her thoughts. The drive home was the longest Sarah had ever experienced. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as the weight of what had just happened settled deeper into her chest. Fired! For something as innocent as helping a boy. The injustice of it all felt suffocating. When Sarah finally stepped into her small apartment, the silence was deafening. She dropped her bag on the floor and collapsed onto the couch, the events from earlier replaying over and over in her mind. The image of Barron, the strange agent, and Mrs. Kensington's cold dismissal haunted her. Her phone buzzed again, a string of messages from friends and family asking if she was okay. Sarah didn't respond. How could she explain what had happened? That a simple act of kindness had cost her everything? As night fell, her thoughts only grew darker. She remembered the way Barron had looked at her, his eyes full of trust and desperation. And yet, there was a hidden weight behind his calm demeanor, a weight she couldn't shake off. There was more to this than just a casual encounter. The next morning, her phone was flooded with articles and news snippets about Barron Trump. His name wasn't just a random one. It was everywhere, tied to political scandals and privacy breaches. Sarah hadn't known the full extent of it yesterday, but now the magnitude of the mistake became overwhelming. She sat by the window, watching the city lights blur into the night. The weight of her decision gnawed at her, but her heart ached with the injustice of it all. What had she done wrong? She helped a boy. What could have possibly gone wrong? The phone buzzed again. This time, it was an unknown number. Sarah hesitated before answering. "Hello? Miss Sarah," a cold voice on the other end interrupted her. "You've stirred up more than you realize. We can't let this go unnoticed." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. "What do you mean?" she whispered. "The path you've taken isn't simple anymore," the voice continued, its tone smooth yet ominous. "You've become a part of something bigger, whether you want it or not. Stay careful." The line went dead. Sarah stared at the phone, her mind racing faster than ever before. She wasn't just fired anymore. She was caught in something far beyond her understanding. The sun had barely risen when Sarah woke up the next morning, but sleep hadn't brought relief. Her mind was still trapped in the web of confusion and fear from the previous day. The unknown caller's warning echoed in her ears. "Stay careful." What did that even mean? She sat by the window, the city bustling around her, but inside, everything felt still. Silent. A chilling reminder of the power dynamics she had unintentionally stumbled into. Barron Trump wasn't just any boy. He was part of a world where consequences weren't simple, where even small actions had ripple effects. The day passed slowly, and despite the hustle of her daily routine, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Every text message, every glance she received in the street, felt weighted with suspicion. She knew now that her world had shifted. That evening, the phone buzzed again. This time, it was a familiar number, Mrs. Kensington's assistant. "Mrs. Kensington requests your presence," the smooth voice said, void of emotion. "Immediately." Sarah hesitated. She wasn't sure if she was ready to face the woman again, not after everything that had happened. But her feet moved forward, driven by some unspoken force, toward the mansion she had once called her workplace. The estate was colder than she remembered, and the grand halls echoed with silence. Mrs. Kensington sat in her usual seat by the fireplace, her expression unreadable. The room was dimly lit, adding to the oppressive atmosphere. "I assume you've given this some thought," Mrs. Kensington said softly, her voice a stark contrast to her earlier dismissal. Sarah swallowed hard, bracing herself for whatever was coming next. "I have. And I still don't understand what I did wrong." Mrs. Kensington's lips curled into a slight smirk. "You don't understand? You endangered us, Sarah. Whether you knew it or not, your actions have consequences." "But all I did was help a boy," Sarah protested, her voice trembling with frustration. "Why does it matter? I didn't seek anything from it." Mrs. Kensington's gaze sharpened. "That's where you're mistaken. You think you helped a boy. But you helped someone with influence, with power. And now, the web is far too tangled to undo." Silence hung between them. Sarah's mind raced. Every word felt like a dagger to her understanding of what was real. "You need to be careful moving forward," Mrs. Kensington continued, her voice lowering. "There are forces beyond your comprehension at play. You're involved now, whether you like it or not." Sarah left the mansion in a daze, her heart pounding in her chest. Everything she thought was simple, the act of kindness, her job, had unraveled into a complicated mess she couldn't escape from. The streets were crowded, but Sarah felt isolated. Every corner she turned seemed to lead her deeper into uncertainty. After Mrs. Kensington's chilling warning, her mind couldn't rest. The weight of her actions pressed on her shoulders, heavier with each passing hour. What had started as a simple act of kindness had spiraled into something she couldn't control. The following days blurred together in a haze of sleepless nights and restless days. Sarah spent hours scrolling through articles, piecing together fragments of information about Barron Trump and the web of power that surrounded him. The stories were ominous, whispers of surveillance, hidden agendas, and an unyielding grip on anyone who dared step too close. Each glance at her phone sent a fresh wave of anxiety. Messages from friends grew scarce, their concern replaced by cautious distance. No one wanted to get involved in something they didn't fully understand. And who could blame them? Even Sarah didn't fully comprehend the danger she was now a part of. One evening, as the city lights dimmed and shadows stretched across her apartment, her phone buzzed again. It was a message, a simple text from an unknown number. "They're watching." A cold shiver ran down her spine. She knew Mrs. Kensington had spoken the truth now. There were eyes everywhere. The fear was suffocating, like she was trapped in a maze with no exit. The next day, Sarah's usual routes to work felt more precarious. Every step she took felt scrutinized, as though unseen forces were guiding her movements. She avoided crowded areas, opting for quieter streets, but even in solitude, the sense of being hunted refused to leave. Her thoughts raced back to Barron, the boy she had helped. There was more to his story than he let on, she was sure of it. He had been calm, too composed for someone his age. And that small, fleeting smile he had given her in the park, it haunted her. Was it a message? A warning? At her desk that evening, Sarah began drafting a message, a simple yet risky one, to Barron. She hesitated, staring at her screen. What if he didn't respond? What if the consequences were worse than she could imagine? Yet, something inside her urged her to take the chance. I need answers. Please help me understand what's happening. She hit send and waited. The seconds stretched into minutes, then hours. Sleep eluded her once again. The next morning felt heavier than usual. Sarah's phone was still buzzing with notifications. News articles, messages from friends who didn't know what to say, and that one unanswered text to Barron. Her breath hitched at the sight of his name flashing on her screen. Barron, we need to talk. Her fingers trembled as she opened the message. The simplicity of the words only heightened her anticipation. How much did he know? What could he reveal that could change everything? She agreed to meet him at a small cafe tucked away from the city's chaos. The walk there felt endless, her thoughts tangled in uncertainty. The streets were quiet, eerily so. Each step echoed louder than the last, amplifying her fear. The cafe was dimly lit, the soft hum of conversation in the background. Sarah spotted him immediately. His tall, lean frame sat at a corner table, his eyes scanning the room cautiously. She approached slowly, taking a seat across from him. You shouldn't be here, Barron said quietly, his voice low but steady. It's not safe. Sarah clenched her hands under the table. Then why did you text me? She whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the cafe. Barron sighed, the weight of his words heavy. Because you need to know the truth. You've stepped into something bigger than you realize. This isn't about a photo or a simple act of kindness. Sarah's breath hitched again. Then what is it about? Barron's gaze shifted to the window, watching the people pass by, as though checking if anyone was watching. My family, my father, he's powerful. And powerful people have enemies. They control everything, from the media to the smallest details of people's lives. You became a risk the moment you helped me. The words were a punch to her gut. Sarah leaned back, stunned by the weight of his revelation. But I didn't ask for any of this, she said, her voice breaking. I just wanted to help. Barron looked at her, his expression somber. That's how they pull people in, by making them think they're just doing the right thing. But the right thing isn't always simple when you're dealing with them. Sarah sat in silence, her mind racing. Every word he spoke resonated, slicing through her disbelief. She had thought helping a boy would be innocent, but Barron's words revealed the dangerous reality she was now a part of. You have to leave, Barron finally said, his voice firm. Disappear. Change everything, your job, your life. It's the only way to stay safe. Her heart felt like it was breaking. I can't just leave everything behind, she whispered. I don't even know where to go. You don't have a choice, Barron replied, his tone final. They'll come after you if you stay. The weight of his warning hung heavily in the air. Sarah sat in silence, her hands trembling in her lap. Barron's words echoed in her mind, relentless and unyielding. Disappear. Change everything. The weight of his warning pressed down on her, suffocating in its intensity. She stared out the cafe window, watching the world move around her as though nothing had changed. But everything had changed. Every sound, every shadow, seemed like a threat now. She no longer knew what was real or who she could trust. I can't leave, she finally whispered, more to herself than to Barron. This is my life, my work, my friends. I can't just disappear. Barron leaned forward slightly, his expression calm yet firm. You don't have a choice. They've seen you. They've connected you to something they won't allow to remain untouched. Her breath hitched, and for the first time in days, tears filled her eyes. Why? She asked, her voice breaking. Why is this happening? I did something good. I helped. How is that a threat? Barron hesitated, his gaze softening slightly. It's because they don't care about good or bad. They care about power. Control. You've become a variable they can't afford to leave unchecked. The words hung in the air, suffocating in their truth. Sarah felt as though the world she had once known was unraveling piece by piece, and there was no way to stop it. You don't have to trust me, Barron continued, his voice steady. But trust the danger. It's real. Sarah shook her head slowly, unable to comprehend the weight of it all. If I disappear, she said quietly, what happens to everything I've worked for? To the people who need me. You have to let it go, Barron urged. For your own safety. You're too deep in this now. The cafe door opened, a bell chiming softly. Sarah instinctively tensed, her gaze snapping toward the entrance. Two men in dark suits entered, scanning the room methodically. Sarah's stomach dropped. They were here. Barron stood abruptly. It's happening, he said, his voice sharp. There's no more time. Without thinking, Sarah grabbed her coat and followed him through the back exit. The cold air hit her like a shock, but it wasn't nearly as piercing as the fear that gripped her chest. Her mind raced, her breath came in short, frantic gasps. She didn't know where she was going. She didn't know how she could escape this. All she knew was that time was running out, and the world was closing in on her faster than she could process. The cold wind whipped through the alleyway as Sarah and Barron hurried down the narrow street. The dim streetlights flickered overhead, casting long, eerie shadows. Her mind raced faster than her feet, processing everything Barron had told her. She was no longer dealing with a simple threat. This was a web of danger so vast, so intricate it was almost suffocating. Barron glanced back, his sharp eyes scanning the shadows around them. They're close, he said, his voice low, urgent. We need to move faster. Sarah's breath came in short gasps, her heart pounding in her chest. Where are we going? She managed to ask, her voice trembling with fear. To a safe house. It's the only place I know they can't track you, he responded, his expression grim. But we can't stay there long. They're searching for us, Sarah. They'll stop at nothing. Her mind flashed to her apartment, the images of her quiet, familiar life now lost to the threat that loomed over her. Every memory, every comfort she once had, seemed fragile and distant. This feels impossible, she whispered. Barron stopped suddenly, turning to face her. His voice was gentle yet firm. It's not impossible if you stay focused. They've left you no choice. You're already in the game, whether you want to be or not. Tears threatened to spill down her cheeks, but she blinked them away. I didn't ask for any of this, she said hoarsely, her voice breaking. I didn't want to get involved. And no one does, Barron replied quietly. But sometimes they pull people into their world without consent. They make sure you're part of the system, even when you try to step back. The reality hit her like a tidal wave. There was no escape, no way out without paying a price. The weight of helplessness pressed on her chest, suffocating and relentless. Why me? She asked. What did I do to deserve this? Barron shook his head. It doesn't matter what you did or didn't do. They'll find a way to control everyone eventually. They moved again, the distant sound of footsteps growing louder behind them. The darkness wrapped around them like a suffocating blanket, every turn they took feeling more desperate. Sarah's mind raced through the faces of her friends, the life she had once led. Would she ever see them again? Would they even recognize her once all of this was over? Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they reached a small, hidden entrance beneath a crumbling brick wall. Barron opened the door swiftly, motioning for Sarah to enter. She hesitated, her breath caught in her throat. "This is the only way," Barron said, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. "Trust me, Sarah. Trust is all we have now." And with that, Sarah stepped into the unknown. The door slammed shut behind them with a low, hollow echo. Sarah stood in the dim, musty room, her breath shallow and uneven. The safe house was a stark contrast to her life just days ago, a tiny, windowless space tucked beneath the city's surface. Barron moved quickly, checking every corner, ensuring there was no hidden danger. Sarah's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, each one darker than the last. Her fingers traced the edge of the old wooden table, feeling the roughness against her skin. Every creak in the floorboard sent a fresh wave of anxiety through her. "What happens now?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Barron didn't answer right away. He pulled a chair up to the table and sat down, his expression unreadable. "We wait," he said finally, "for the moment when we can move again." Sarah sank into a chair across from him, her hands gripping her knees tightly. The silence was deafening, every tick of the old clock on the wall seeming to stretch into eternity. "I can't just sit here," she said, frustration coloring her voice. "I need answers. I need to know why." Barron's gaze softened slightly. "You'll get answers, but only if you stay alive to ask them. Right now, every move is a risk." "But I can't live like this," Sarah snapped. "Not knowing, not understanding." "There are things you'll never understand," Barron replied quietly. "You have to trust that some answers will come with time, and some will come only when you're ready." Sarah's breath hitched, the weight of his words pressing down on her chest. She felt trapped, not just physically, but mentally. The fear of the unknown was more terrifying than the dark room they were in. The room felt smaller now, suffocating her with every passing second. Her thoughts flicked to her family, her friends, the life she had left behind. Would they ever know what had happened to her? Would they search for her? Or had she already disappeared from their memories? "What if they come for me here?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What if they find this place?" Barron's expression hardened again, his eyes sharp. "Then we fight. We don't go down without a fight." A heavy silence fell between them once more. Sarah closed her eyes, leaning back in the chair. She tried to steady her breathing, tried to focus on something, anything, to escape the suffocation of her thoughts. But nothing came. They waited, trapped in the unknown, unsure of what the next move would bring. Hours passed in the stillness of the dimly lit safe house. Sarah sat with her head bowed, her hands tightly clasped together. The air was thick with tension, and every breath felt like a struggle. Barron sat silently across from her, his gaze locked on the room's only entrance, always alert. The silence between them was unbearable, but neither spoke. The weight of their situation hung in the room, suffocating yet oddly familiar. Sarah's thoughts raced, each one more haunting than the last. What was the truth she was meant to uncover? And how much more would she have to sacrifice to understand it? Finally, Barron broke the silence. "You're strong, Sarah," he said softly, his voice steady but reassuring. "Stronger than most people in this situation." She lifted her head slowly, meeting his eyes with a questioning look. "Strong?" she echoed quietly, almost bitterly. "I feel like I'm barely holding on." Barron's lips pressed into a thin line, but he didn't back away from her gaze. Strength isn't about holding everything together. Sometimes it's about knowing when to let go. Letting go. The words swirled in her mind. Letting go of everything she had once known, the life she had built, the people she loved. It sounded impossible. "You're right," Sarah said after a pause, her voice barely above a whisper. "But how do I know if I'm ready to let go? Every piece of my life feels like it's slipping away, and I don't even know what's left." Barron leaned forward, his voice firm but gentle. "You'll know. It won't be a decision made lightly. But the moment will come when you'll understand you've lost the things that were only an illusion of control. Real strength is accepting that." Sarah closed her eyes, trying to block out the suffocating thoughts. She could feel the tears threatening to fall, but she held them back. Weakness was something she couldn't afford right now, not when everything was on the line. The room was silent again, the tension thick. Sarah opened her eyes and looked at Barron. His calm, steady demeanor was the only thing grounding her, even if it wasn't enough to ease her fears completely. "Why me?" she asked finally, her voice barely a breath. "Why did I have to get involved?" Barron didn't flinch. "Because you chose to help someone in need," he said quietly. "You acted when others wouldn't. That's why they noticed you. That's why you're here." She let out a slow, shaky breath, her hands tightening into fists. "And now I'm trapped." "You're not trapped," Barron said gently. "You're just starting to understand that freedom comes at a cost." Her gaze dropped again, her thoughts swirling in a whirlwind of doubt and anger. She didn't want to accept this. She didn't want to believe that the path ahead was one of loss and sacrifice. But the truth had never been kind. The next morning arrived like a heavy fog, blurring the edges of reality. Sarah sat by the small window, staring out into the distant streets, her thoughts a whirlwind of confusion and fear. Barron had left early, promising to return soon with more information, but the silence in the house felt oppressive. Her fingers traced the cool glass, as if searching for answers through the cold pain. She felt utterly alone, trapped in a web of decisions she couldn't escape from. Each moment weighed down by the looming danger that followed her every breath. She had tried to sleep, but her dreams were haunted by flashes of people in dark suits, the weight of betrayal, and the haunting question, "What if they find me anyway?" The room was a constant reminder of the life she had left behind. No more texts from friends. No phone calls. No plans. Everything had been stripped away in a single night. And yet, there was still one glimmer of hope, one thing she could control, her future. Sarah took a deep breath and pulled out her phone. The screen flickered to life, showing a list of messages from her closest friends, all unanswered. Her thumb hovered over the screen, ready to type something, anything, but the words caught in her throat. "I'm safe. Just scared." It felt selfish to even think of contacting them, knowing they'd be dragged into this mess if they knew where she was. But the thought of never speaking to them again tore her apart from the inside. A soft knock on the door broke her thoughts. Barron entered the room, his expression serious but determined. "We have to move," he said. "They're closing in faster than I anticipated." Sarah looked up, her eyes wide with dread. "Where will we go now?" Barron hesitated for a moment, but then gave her a steady look. "It's time. There's only one place left, the final safe house. But it's deeper, more secure. After that, we're out of options." Sarah swallowed hard, her mind racing through every possible scenario. And what happens if they find that one too? Barron's jaw tightened, his eyes scanning the room as if imagining every escape route. "We fight. We hold them off for as long as we can. But it's a risk. Every second we stay, the more dangerous it becomes." Tears pricked at Sarah's eyes once again. "I can't lose everything," she whispered. "Everything I've built, everyone I've loved. It's all slipping away." Barron's expression softened slightly, but his tone remained firm. "Sometimes, losing is the only way to truly find yourself. This isn't the end, it's a new beginning. But only if you're ready to let go." Her heart ached at his words. Letting go. It wasn't just about physical escape anymore. It was about accepting that her life would never be the same. She clenched her fists tightly. I have no choice, do I? Barron gave her a small, resolute nod. No, you don't. The weight of his statement hung in the air. Sarah knew he was right. She couldn't stay here, pretending everything would go back to normal. The world had changed, and so had she. We move, she said, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. And we don't stop. Barron gave her a small smile. That's all I needed to hear. With one final glance around the room, Sarah took the first step toward a new path, uncertain, terrifying, but necessary. The only choice left.